Second law, the law of free will. Spirits have the freedom to choose their destiny, as to whether they wish to evolve or not. Spirits advance when they decide freely to harmonize with the law of love because they understand and share that law and act in harmony with it. Spiritual progression only takes place when it is chosen and internalized through free will and through the spirit's own effort, without any kind of coercion or imposition. There is evolution only where there is freedom. In many of your given explanations, you speak of free will as something that is very important to respect. That's right. But what is free will exactly? It is the capacity that all spirits have to decide for themselves what they want to do. And why is it so important to respect free will? Because it is a fundamental spiritual law on which the spirit's evolutionary progress is based. And what does the law of free will consist of? It is a spiritual law that says that all spirits have the freedom to choose their own destiny for themselves. And why do you say that the spirit's evolutionary progress is based on free will? Because spiritual progression is only real when it is chosen and internalized through free will, in other words, through the spirit's free choice without any kind of coercion or imposition. Why is that so? Because if the progress were forced, once the form of coercion or imposition disappeared, the spirits would go back to how they really are and not how circumstances have obliged them to be. But if it is a spiritual law, why isn't this law obeyed on earth? It is obeyed, as the spiritual laws are written within the essence of each spirit. There is a force that drives the spirit to always search for happiness, and through that search the spirit evolves. Just as it is impossible to be happy without love, no spirit can be truly happy spiritually without being free. It is in the essence of the spirit to be so. If God had wanted spirits not to be free, he would have programmed their nature to be happy as slaves. However, as it is totally the contrary, that is to say, the spirit is miserable in slavery, whatever type of slavery this may be, so we must conclude that the spirit has been created to be free, and that is so on earth as well as in the rest of the universe. Right? But reality shows that most people on our planet don't act freely. Instead, they oblige themselves, or they are obliged to do many things they don't want to. Exactly. That is what happens in your world. This law is constantly violated due to the poor evolution of the majority of its inhabitants, who still don't know or don't want to respect that law, because in order to respect free will they must renounce egoism. As a result, one of the objectives of spiritual learning is to learn to respect other people's free will, but to also demand that their own free will is respected. Do you mean to say that the law of free will is known and respected by the inhabitants of other more advanced worlds? That's right, because it is a universal spiritual law. And their worlds are much happier than yours precisely because they put a lot of emphasis on respecting free will, as well as the rest of the spiritual laws. Well, they could come and show us the secret of their happiness. Precisely because advanced spirits know, respect, and follow the law of free will, they are very careful not to violate this law, especially when concerning interference in worlds inhabited by less advanced spirits. Although there is no intention to harm, excess interference can create a dependency of the less advanced spirits or civilizations on the more advanced ones, and this would cause evolutionary stagnation on the receiving planet. That is why any help that is given both from the spiritual plane as well as from spiritually advanced physical worlds to less advanced worlds is always very subtle and never against the will of the actual being or beings who need help, because otherwise this would be coercing their free will. It is determined that all beings in question manifest their will to evolve and receive help. I still don't quite understand exactly where the problem lies. Could you give me an example so that I can understand? All right. Imagine that an inhabitant of an advanced world arrives on Earth and you recognize his high evolution and decide to let him govern the planet to solve all your problems, based on his knowledge of the spiritual laws and just like on his own planet of origin, where respect for other beings of inferior evolution has led them to follow a vegetarian diet and not to hurt any animal. He decides to promote animal protection laws that prohibit, amongst other things, hunting, bullfighting, and meat consumption. Would humanity on Earth be willing to give up such habits? Well, I don't know. I suppose there would be people in favor and people against it. In the current state of humanity and being very generous, more than 80% would be against these measures. There would be extremely violent protests and revolts all over the planet to stop compliance with that new law. Faced with this dilemma, what should the extraterrestrial leader do? Renounce his own convictions to please the people, or on the contrary impose the laws in spite of the opposition of the majority? If he opted for the first decision, he would be violating his own free will by having to do things that go against his own will. If he chose the second option, he would be violating the free will of the people by imposing a law that goes against their will. So this is a dilemma without a possible solution. Yes, there is a solution, and it is what is given. This solution is that there are no evolved people governing your world. If advanced beings don't occupy actual government positions in worlds such as yours, it is simply because the majority of you don't want them to be in command, nor do you wish to accept the changes that they propose. Neither do they wish to impose their will over yours because they know that there is no point in using force. In the history of your planet, there have been numerous cases of more or less honest people who succeeded in occupying high positions of power and tried to change things for the better. And what happened? They lasted a very short time. The people around them eliminated them. That is why elevated spirits only give advice, preach through example without imposing, and then individuals decide whatever suits them best. What would be the practical results of applying the law of free will on Earth if, as happens in other more advanced worlds, there were a decision to abide by it? The disappearance of any form of slavery, coercion, oppression, manipulation, and harm from some human beings towards others. An advanced being would never violate the right to life of other beings. So wars, the death penalty, murder, and abortion would disappear, because all those practices violate the right to life of other beings. Any form of ill treatment or sexual abuse against children and adults would disappear. Therefore, pederasty, rape, prostitution, and any other form of sexual practice whereby the will of other human beings is forced or coerced would disappear, especially in the cases of weaker and defenseless beings. Any formula that coerces the free expression of thought and feeling would disappear. Consequently, censure, manipulation, deception, repression, or kidnapping would not exist. Any egoistic religion, philosophy, or doctrine that justifies oppression, aggression, control, and/or violence against other human beings, because of racial, religious, cultural, economic, political, or of any other nature would disappear. Therefore, racism, totalitarianism, fascism, religious fanaticism, militarism, imperialism, or capitalism would disappear because they are ideologies that base the well-being of a few people on the suffering of other human beings. Any form of slavery, be it physical or mental, which tries to impose upon the spiritual being will fail because spirits will rebel internally against anything that enslaves them and sooner or later will fight against it with all their force to free themselves. This is the reason why any doctrine, religion, ideology, political, or economic system that does not respect the law of free will of the spirit will be unstable and short-lived, whereas those based on the spiritual laws are stable and long-lasting. Any form of slavery would disappear, be it physical or psychological. Abuse, inside or outside family ties, neither parents against their children nor children against their parents, nor husbands against their wives nor wives against their husbands, nor bosses against their employees nor employees against their bosses, nor the strong against the weak. Any practice, pastime, or entertainment based on causing suffering and destruction to other living beings would disappear, especially to those mammals that are closer to us in evolution, such as higher mammals that are not strictly for reasons of survival, such as bullfighting, hunting, fishing, and livestock farming in developed countries. But in order to keep a law, it is essential to know it, isn't it? How is it possible to teach people who have no interest in learning without obliging them in some way? Wouldn't you have to do something, as when children don't want to go to school and you oblige them to go in order to learn? As I have said, if we have just mentioned that to keep the law of free will is to respect the Spirit's will to decide freely, however spiritual it may be, the very nature of the law impedes imposing it, as to do so would be to violate that same law. In other words, the end does not justify the means, and even less if, by the means, we are failing to observe the objective that we pursue. Forcing is not the way, because, as I have said, whatever is achieved by imposition or coercion is lost when the coercing force disappears. Spirits would go back to the way they really are, and not how circumstances have obliged them to be. Reincarnation and forgetting past lives are specifically designed so that spirits experience free will and evolve through their own merit, without any type of coercion. We have already talked extensively about this before when we said that the spirits themselves choose freely whether they wish to evolve or not, and the kind of tests that they wish to face in order to advance. Regarding the example that we gave of children and school, the most spiritually advanced educational tendencies that have also reached your world try not to coerce children, but instead attempt to stimulate their own abilities by making learning attractive and not tedious, which is the best way for children to learn, not out of obligation but rather out of devotion. So what is the correct way for people to know the spiritual laws? The only way is to preach by example, and that is what the most advanced spirits that have incarnated on earth have done. I am talking about Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Zoroaster, Antulio, and other avatars or advanced beings that incarnated on earth to teach the law of love, the law of free will, and the other spiritual laws. They made their life into an example of personal application, a life that was in harmony with the spiritual laws without forcing anybody to do the same. Well, the law of free will has not been clearly understood by the supposed followers of Jesus, as they ended up imposing their beliefs on others by force, through the use of violence, coercion, and fear. I refer to the Catholic Church with the Inquisition and the Crusades. So it is the followers who are not at the level of the message that they claim to convey. But this is not the fault of Jesus or the avatars, but rather it stems from egoism and the prevailing lack of evolution in your world, which has led certain people to appropriate some ideas that were true and distort them to control and manipulate others. Religions and beliefs that impose or oblige will not make the spirit evolve, nor can they be considered truthful or in harmony with God and superior spirituality, as nobody who violates the law of free will can be considered to be an intermediary of God or as someone who carries out God's plan. Such beliefs will irremediably disappear from the earth in time. But we will talk about this subject more specifically some other time, because it is quite important. Well, in spite of this intervention, I don't see that things have greatly improved in the world. Yes, to a certain extent. In past eras, humans were raised as if they were livestock to be eaten, and this would be an abomination to you. Now, cannibalism is practically wiped out from the earth. Less than 200 years ago, slavery still existed legally and the slave trade existed all over the world. Although slavery now exists in other forms, at least formal slavery is pursued and punished by laws in all countries, and is practiced illegally outside the law. Religious persecution, although it still exists in some parts of the world, has diminished in intensity and cruelty. In many countries there is legislation which protects the right of free belief, something unthinkable in Europe before the Protestant Reformation. The death penalty as a form of punishment has been abolished in many countries. The drawing up and approval by an international organization such as the United Nations of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, even though in practice it is not being adhered to, is a clear example that there are spirits on your planet that have advanced enough to recognize that there are fundamental rights that should not be violated. In this declaration, the rights that guarantee the execution of free will are perfectly specified and demand that nations carry out actions that impede the violation of free will of other human beings. So this declaration can be considered to be a very appropriate development of the law of free will. In the Ten Commandments we can also find some hints of respect for free will, such as the commandments "you shall not kill" and "you shall not steal." Although there is still a lot to be done, all these things are advances compared to the situation of past eras. If you like the video, leave a comment and a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you, and see you in the next video.